Hey, welcome everybody. It is Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Mary Beth is off this week, so filling in, we have Alex, who has been here before, a couple times actually now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this would be so now you're filling in, but and I guess we weren't going to do the news because Mary Beth always does the news, but you told me you have Star Wars news, so
I
what
do. It's
are
nothing too
Star
big.
Wars news?
Yeah, it's nothing too big. It was funny actually. It's been ever since you and I started talking about doing this topic that I started just organically coming into more and more Star Wars news. One of which, if anybody's planning on heading into Montreal this summer, Ray Park, who plays Darth Maul, is coming to Montreal Comic Con. Definitely worth a visit if anybody's in the neighborhood. The other thing that I found was that Phantom Menace is being re-released into theaters come May. So that'll be exciting. I'm actually really excited to go. The last thing that I found out was this morning, actually, John Williams, who does the score for Star Wars, was officially titled a Disney legend today.
Well deserved, by the way.
Very well deserved. Yeah.
He is an amazing composer. Started out in jazz, so believe it or not, with writing jazz, playing jazz music.
Okay, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah. He did the soundtracks for the original Lost in Space, and you definitely hear the jazz influences, especially in the second version or the newer version of it, because he did two versions. The first season, and I think they changed it in the second or third season. So, hey, I'm going to say hi to Sue and Jeff, and of course, Mary Beth is actually watching us. And Bill, how you doing? Bruce is there. How you guys all doing? Welcome. Thank you for coming. So we have actually, because we've talked about the Star Wars, and you kind of always told me that you're never really a Star Wars fan. We try not to hold that against you.
It's not that I'm not a Star Wars fan. It's that I didn't feel, I guess, comfortable calling myself one when I really only go in for one film. And unfortunately, up until about recent history, it has been the most hated film of the franchise. So for me, it's just easier to say wasn't there, didn't see it, couldn't have helped it, and just move on instead of doing an hour segment every time I talk to somebody about Star Wars.
Well, okay, so much like Star Trek, Star Wars has the same pattern with generations that see it at different times. And of course, the older generation that saw the original film in 77 with the phenomenon that was at the time, is always going to be like, no, the original trilogies are the best. And then, as the next generation and Phantom Menace and the newer prequels were the first ones they were exposed to in the theater, they're always going to. Star Trek was the same way. You get the old people, TOS, and Next Gen, and there's people that actually think Voyager is the best. I'm sure there's people that think Discovery is the best Star Trek. It's horrible. Horror is. But, so I try to respect people's opinion on when they see these films. Of course, me being an original, and I think, one of the things I think why maybe the newer films didn't impact, like, say, your generation or my daughter's generation, is we never saw anything close to what the original Star Wars was prior to this. It was so new and so different from any sci-fi film we saw before. It's hard to explain the impact of it without you experiencing it, because you grew up in a time when CGI was normal for films. What I'm saying?
I mean, I was on the cusp. You have to remember, I'm still near a decade older than your daughter. So I was really on the cusp of...
You're born in 94, correct?
I'm born in 93.
93. Yeah. Okay, so Jurassic Park came out around that time, which was really the first CGI that blew everybody's brains out. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. You grew up at a time like post Jurassic.
It was early, for sure. Yeah, it's not like we see it now, but for sure.
That's all I'm trying to say. Before that, it was so that's. I'm just trying to lay some groundwork. I'm not saying one way anything's better in the box. So then, of course, in 98 was when the Phantom Menace was released. I think something in that era, around that.
I believe.
Yeah, and we hadn't had anything for well over a decade.
Yeah.
from Star Wars and of anything.
It's interesting.
Shows, cartoons, nothing.
It's interesting that you bring up which Star Wars had which generation, because I was actually going to state for you and I to have this discussion as kind of an interesting niche, because the age that you were when the original trilogy came out, not to make you feel that old, is the same age that I was when the prequel trilogy came out.
Yeah,
so,
it was 99, just in case anybody wants to correct me. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. So, and again, it has a different impact on kids than it does on adults. There's no question about it.
It absolutely does. And that was one of my first points about appreciating The Phantom Menace for the time that it came out, because I was around Annie's age when that movie came out. So for me, that was a movie about a peer of mine. That was somebody that was on sort of equalish footing.
Right.
You're painting in broad strokes. So for kids like myself at the time, it was really empowering to watch this kid that had so much agency over what happened to him. I mean, obviously, we get introduced to him being a slave, but his mother gives him the choice of where he wants to go. She gives him the best advice that she can and the best love that she can. And she just allows him to make the choice when it matters most. And you see him have this multifaceted kind of life. You see that he has his own friends, his own hobbies. He kind of does his own thing, and he still comes home being a respectful kid and having a healthy relationship with his mom. With all the Bible references kind of not in the discussion, it's a very empowering relationship to see. So for me, Annie was very much like, yes, that's who I want to be. It was my first impression of Star Wars. I didn't know that was Darth Vader at the time. So excuse me for my judge of character.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of an interesting point, because we all knew where the story had to lead, obviously, which I think this is the problem, I think, with a prequel of these types, is that we know where it's going to go. They have to get to Vader.
That's why I like that there was well over a decade between material, because when you do it so close, you already know where it's going to go. Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit had that problem. We all knew where it was going to go when The Hobbit came out. There was no generational difference. But for something like this, there were kids young enough that didn't know where it was going to go and just rooted for Annie because you're supposed to in the beginning, which is kind of an interesting.
And I think, I understand what you're saying. I think, but so for me, Mary Beth was asking if you saw it as a child, but I guess you answered that. So I'm just reading some of the comments. But okay, so for me, I'm just putting it in perspective. So here I was 10 years old when the original movie came out. It completely changed my world. I was, just for like 10 years straight, Star Wars was the only thing that mattered. Still is a huge part of my life. Still watch the movies, still do Star Wars stuff. So that the impact that this film had for a lot of us of that age and adults, it wasn't just kids that were enamored with that film. It was across the board, no matter who you were, nerd. That's what I think was so amazing about that film, is it didn't matter whether you were a jock, whether you were an engineer, an artist. Everybody came together. That movie, everybody loved it. Most people loved it. I shouldn't say everybody, but the majority, obviously. I mean, the movie ran for like a year in the theater.
No.
It's crazy. So anyway, we have Jedi, which was 85 or something around that range. I don't know. Somebody will correct me. And then we finally get to 99. So we're looking at 14, 15 years of nothing. They did re-release the original trilogy with the edits in the early 90s, with the CGI edits, which are not good, and making Han not shoot first, and which really didn't do a lot for the fan base. Nobody cared for those changes. I don't know of anybody, again, knowing the original cut. But so we get to Phantom Menace. Now, I will admit, I was very excited to see this. I don't want to say that I wasn't. I saw it midnight, on the Thursday, because it was released on a Friday. So midnight showing, saw it in the theater. It was the first time I ever pre-bought a ticket for anything. And initially I liked it. Initially I did like it, because it was just Star Wars. You were so hungry, you were gonna eat whatever stuck in front of you. You know what I'm saying? And then it wasn't, I think, until later when you started to kind of dissect it. But I think a lot of things I think people didn't like about it is it didn't have the same feel as the original trilogy. So the editing was different. There was a different look and feel to the films.
Yes, I do agree. I had gone back to the original series just to be able to compare more freshly to the prequels to see how well it did. Tatooine wasn't too bad if you take away the difference in film quality, because obviously it's not going to be the same. It's going to be the same production value, just at different times, at different opportunities of production value. So without that in mind, it does look quite similar at times. What I appreciate about the prequels is that it did have elements of the original series. You saw old characters, you saw old sets, and you had old score as well. There are a few points in the prequels where they do have the score from the original series. And I think they mix it in really well with new aspects. Maybe it rubbed the wrong way for the original trilogy fans, but I find the fan service is actually quite well done. For myself, somebody had commented it's quite a different perspective to see the Star Wars series the way that it was released versus chronological order. Seeing it in chronological order, it did feel like and this might rub the wrong way, but it did feel like the original series had fan service from the prequels. So it was kind of cool how you could flip it back and forth. It's either fan service from the original trilogy or it's fan service from what you first knew. And I think maybe I'm kind of ruined by the Alien prequels because those were horrible.
Yeah, no,
so
we
have a
don't
little
speak of
more
those
concern
either.
there, but I do find that they're
And there was no reason to make those.
agreed. Although George Lucas himself will say that there was no reason to make this story. He knew that it was a story that nobody wanted to know. And more on to that fact, Chris, you had said that 70% of a film is the suspense. And when you know what the end result is, you don't have that suspense. So in a film, what else do you have? To me, you have character development. You get to see more of what's going on between the characters, within relationships, how characters build the personalities that make the choices that they do in the original series. You kind of get a backdrop and an explanation for that. And that's kind of what George wanted to provide. He wanted to turn one of the most famous villains of media and give him a tragic storyline. Here's how you feel bad for Darth Vader. And that's pretty intense, in my opinion.
Well, we kind of got that a little bit in Jedi because, Luke was always the one saying he knew there was good in him, and that we did see that falter at points. So originally when Lucas came up, when Star Wars, the original film, or as it's called now, A New Hope, was out, at that time, nobody, of course, knew that Vader was Luke's father, and we didn't know that, of course, Luke and Leia were brother and sister. And I don't think George Lucas did. I think it's pretty much well known that George Lucas did. Maybe the brother and sister bit, maybe, but not really, because he didn't tell like Alan Dean Foster, who wrote Explorer of the Mind's Eye, which came out after Star Wars but before Empire, which clearly had a romantic involvement between Luke and Leia in that book. It is probably the only bad thing, not bad thing, but thing that like doesn't line up in the timeline. So clearly, I think if because Alan also wrote all the novelizations of the other films, so I'm going to guess that had George knew that was where he was going with it, he would have clued in Alan Dean Foster ahead of time and said, "Yeah, this is where this is going. So here's where your novel can go." I could be wrong, but my guess is he didn't know until he wrote Empire that Luke, I am your father bit. This is why we got lines in the original film where, we kind of say, well, they had to back away from Obi-Wan saying, your father was murdered by Darth Vader. And then he had to go, well, it's a certain point of view. That was kind of a weak cover up.
Murdered by Darth Vader, spiritually speaking.
That's what they were going for. And I still say that was a cover over for trying to fix what was said in the original movie. I could be wrong, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Again, you have to remember when you're seeing everything kind of after the fact, so it makes more sense. But when you were watching, you're like, oh, that was a cover up. When you're seeing it for the first time.
Yeah, that's true. Adds a point to having different perspectives of when we saw the series, which is, I always think that's very interesting.
So, but anyway, so we get to Phantom Menace, and it is released. And again, like I said, I initially liked it. I think a lot of the dislike for it, I think, was the fact that it just didn't have that same feel. The soundtrack was great. I don't think anybody would deny that the soundtrack was good. Against, of course, Williams did that as well. So, and I think so positive. Like we could talk about a lot of positive things there. I want to this whole. It's not like they're all bad. Certainly, the music was great. They definitely stepped up with the saber fighting. No question about that was an improvement. Even each film got better. I mean, because you look at the the only really sword fight or the saber fighting we saw in A New Hope was Vader and Obi-Wan, and it was kind of like, it was
true.
Like,
you get too far. You had made a point about the original series that we kind of get a bit of the taste of the tragedy that is Darth Vader's story. But to his credit, we don't get that little kid that cries over his mom. You know what I mean?
Oh.
Like, we don't get that little kid that tries the hardest he's ever done to win a pod race to help these strangers kind of save the galaxy. Like, we get this really hopeful, beautiful flame of a child that just seems like he's going to grow up to save everybody. And we get to actually follow along on that journey before we get, for kids of my generation, before we get to Darth Vader, which just, I think, puts a beautiful ring of tragedy on the original series. And for me, made the original series more compelling to watch than it already was. So I really enjoy that about the prequels.
Okay. But anyway, getting back to the sword fighting.
This is beautifully choreographed. Absolutely.
Well, it got better because we had we had the lame-o one in New Hope. And then when we get to Empire, we have a much better one between Vader and Luke. Especially what you get to see them using Force ways in the fighting, not just use the Force with your senses. They're throwing literally crap at each other. They're jumping. He's doing the flips, the whole thing. So we get to see that. Of course, he would have died falling down the shaft had he not had some kind of probably Jedi powers to guide him to where he ended up. And then, of course, calling for Leia. But and then even in the next movie, again, we have another battle with Vader again and Luke, and we see even more. Well, now we have the Force lightning. The Sith has the lightning, so we get to see that added in and more better. But then when we get to Phantom Menace, now they've brought that up even another notch, because now that battle will be, of course, the one between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul is epic.
Yeah,
it's the best part of the film, bar none, in my opinion. And the music that goes along with it is probably the best part of the film.
Actually, I want to kind of pause there. In the introduction of Phantom, or not the introduction, when Qui-Gon is making the case for Anakin being trained, there's a moment where Qui-Gon says he'll take Anakin if he has to. Subtext being, if Qui-Gon fails, if for some reason Qui-Gon's not there to train Anakin himself. And Qui-Gon, I'm trying to remember what the line is now, but he says something, and there's a reaction in Liam Neeson's face. There's like a subtle fall to his face where it seems so clear that he's using the Force to see where the path is going to go. And I think in that moment, he really saw the end and really put his faith in Obi-Wan to say, I know that I can do this to save the explosion that's going to happen now, and you'll take Anakin and you'll play the long game and you'll be able to finish what I'm trying to start. And I think that's beautiful and, again, tragic, because that's not what happens.
Right. Okay. But again, that was Obi-Wan kind of reluctantly took over, as said he will train him. I don't think he really, because he didn't feel qualified. And of course we got some of that because we got that where there were earlier lines where Obi-Wan says something like to the fact that the older Obi-Wan, where he felt he should have brought him to Yoda and had Yoda train him right off the get-go, and not try to do it himself. So there was this implication that he wasn't up to the task. Clearly, if Anakin had followed the Jedi course and stayed away from Padme, which is why they don't want them having relationships, is because it compromises them. All those things that happen now. could you lay this at Obi-Wan's feet? Because he should have been aware of what was going on.
You kind of can, because here's my argument for that. The beginning of the film, the first dialogue that we get between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan is Obi-Wan saying he's anxious, he's nervous. And Obi-Wan says, you need to lay your anxieties to rest and you need to be present in the moment. And Obi-Wan says, well, Master Yoda says to be mindful of the future at all times. And Qui-Gon kind of puts him in his place and says, yes, but not at the sacrifice of the moment. You need to be more aware of the living force. And that ends up being a theme throughout the entire trilogy, because what I'll argue here is that Annie and Padme's relationship seems rushed because I feel it was made under the influence of the Force. I feel like Annie, with his passions and the level of power that he has, subconsciously, I feel like he's using the Force to draw her in. Because there's, at the beginning of their relationship, Padme's always putting Annie in his place. You'll always be that boy I knew on Tatooine. When Annie tries to cut in and show off in front of her during an official discussion, she puts him in his place and says, no, we're going to do what I want to do, and you're going to do your job, which is to protect me. Anyways, and then completely ignores him. And then there's a complete narrative switch where Annie's all you can think about.
There was also this kind of weird age gap. Clearly, in the first film, she's probably around 18, and he's like what? He's like, so there's like this, and it's as an adult, it's the age gap isn't a problem, but at where they were, that he was kind of pining for her was. So I think that's probably why she was putting him in this place, because she realized that he's just a little kid, and then maybe when he got older, because she didn't see him until he got much older. Again, the next time in the second film. But I agree that was rushed, and that's an interesting theory. I never really thought about him possibly coercing her. And he's saying he's 9, so there's almost a 10-year gap between them. Assuming she was around 18. I don't know if they ever said her age.
They say her age when she's a queen, and I can't remember what age that was. I think she was 14 or 15 when Annie was 9. And I'm no authority on the subject at all, but I had heard something about how the time moves differently on each planet. So it could have been that Annie's aging was kind of sped up while Padme's aging was kind of slowed down. So they kind of meet a little bit more in the middle. Again, I'm not on it.
I never heard that. And that's certainly never. You have to understand one thing about Star Wars. No science applies. None.
No,
and Lucas himself has said, if I want air in space, there's going to be air in space. That's, you know what I'm saying? He says, doesn't care. Because these, as we know, these are not science fiction. It's science fantasy or space fantasy, however you want to look at it. None of the science makes any sense that they're doing. So we set that aside. Bruce is saying, why didn't he just quit being a Jedi? And I think had he done that, Bruce, he would have been sucked over to the dark side even faster. If he had not.
He made his life mission. Like, he left his mom. I don't mean, not that Annie's a real person may feel bad, but I don't mean to speak bad about Annie, but he abandoned his mom to go and be a Jedi and go and work for the greater good and do the right thing. That's not so easily tossed away when you take on a mission of morality like that, especially when you have somebody.
I'm not agreeing with Bruce by any means on this point.
But you don't quit because it's a heavy choice. It's a life-changing choice. That's what he dedicated his life to. He left a lot of things behind, and there were people who were counting on him, people that he loved dearly, as much as the Jedi Order tried not to make him to, but he did. He revered Qui-Gon, and then Obi-Wan was there to consistently pressure him and tell him, Padme was there to say, I know you can do better. So there's all of this faith that's left on his shoulders. What else you're just going to stand up in front of all of your peers, your wife, your mentor, your friends?
And I think that was part of the other thing is they kept saying that he was this chosen one, and nobody actually knew what that meant, to bring balance. They kept saying to bring balance of the Force, but I don't even think the Jedi knew what that was supposed to mean. Because to bring balance would mean that the Sith would have as much equal power as the Jedi. And clearly, for millennia or at least thousands of years, the Jedi had the upper hand.
Yep.
The Sith was always there was a time in the Old Republic when the Sith was more powerful, but they were clearly beaten down by the Jedi, and the Jedi pretty much had the upper hand for hundreds of years. They imply.
And
So
kind of that's my argument about why the prequel trilogies feel so different than the original series as well. It's a different time. This is when the Jedi had the upper hand. This is when they were something to be feared because they were extremely powerful and plentiful. So it has to feel different. Otherwise,
right.
what's changed? What is there left?
The balance would bring it did bring balance to the Force, whereas the Sith, and of course, well, actually, it swayed it the other way after Order 66 because they just went and wiped out every Jedi they could find. So that was I think what people had a problem with. Well, we'll stick with Phantom Menace. Although, we're halfway through the hour already. We gotta move on. We haven't even talked about your favorite character, Jar Jar.
I know, nor have we talked about the conspiracies or what we've seen on screen. I'm so excited. So go ahead, ask your question.
Here's the problem with Jar Jar. Jar Jar was stuck in there to be what Lucas does with each film. He likes to throw in a cutesy little character that the kids are going to latch onto, and it's going to put a little bit of humor. The droids were clearly the original ones for that. Then we had Ewoks. There really wasn't anything in Empire. Our Empire was, and to me, Empire was still the best of the trilogy in the sense that it was the best film. There was no cuteness really in it, but you got Ewoks, you've got the droids, and now of course we get to the trilogy. We need something else, and we stick in Jar Jar as our comic relief.
And then
he hated
to that too. But right, like I was around that age, around 9 or 10 when these movies came out. So yeah, to see Jar Jar, the stumbling, funny sounding, goofy looking thing that's adding this comedic effect, it was hilarious to me growing up. And now the nostalgic factor, like every time he's on screen, I almost instantly smile. So like I know that's not the popular opinion, but he's very entertaining. And not only that, like when you asked me about doing this topic, I kind of looked into, because I'd heard little things from respectively outside of the fandom that there were these crazy fan theories about Jar Jar being a Sith. And I thought that was hilarious until I rewatched Phantom Menace and completely understood why people thought that, because there's just so much luck involved. There's no way that, and I'm not saying that he's this all-knowing, all-powerful Sith Lord. I think that's kind of ridiculous. It's a little too far. I do think that he's Force sensitive, though. There's no way that he got through the Battle of Naboo the way that he did without being at least a little Force sensitive.
Well, I think here's my counter to that.
Okay.
He's like Abbott and Costello of Star Wars, or Mr. Bean of Star Wars, where no matter what he does, he's going to come through. That's the comic part. He's never actually going to get hurt, even though everything is falling. It's the old Charlie. Was it Charlie Chaplin would have the build? He was a stunt. The building would fall down, and his cooks are going to hit him, but he ends up standing right where a window would be. So he ends up standing right.
There's a direct Charlie Chaplin segment that mirrors exactly what happens with Jar Jar in the tank.
That's what I'm saying. So this is what I'm saying. He's that character. I don't think that Lucas intended to say, well, he's only been lucky because of the Force. He's just the comic relief in there, so they can't kill him off or have him injured. So he's just in there. And I get that a 10-year-old would find him funny and amusing. It's just that now you got to sit this old guys that are now in our 30s, okay, watching this again, and we're like, no, we don't want that. We want the more, just like nobody liked Ewoks either, except for kids, which is what he puts them in there for. So, anyway, all the theories are funny, but Lucas has pretty much debunked everything and pretty much said that there was never any of what that's fun to think about. And I have seen the videos and the conspiracy theories where they think he was really controlling everything from behind, but it's fun. The best thing about conspiracy theories is you can find reasons in everything of why it happened. You can come up with, that's the beauty of conspiracy theories.
That's true. And I don't go full in for it where he orchestrated everything. I don't believe that at all. But I do think that being force sensitive is something that even he wasn't aware of. So within his characterizations of being wacky and stumbly and waving his arms around, I don't think it's on purpose, but I do think that because he has a little bit of a force sensitivity, that it's working more for him than he realizes. In a movie that didn't have something like the force, I would agree with you. It would just be this Charlie Chaplin kind of lucky draw character. I don't know. I just feel like there's a different interpretation there to take, and it's kind of fun.
I think you probably have a good point within the Star Wars realm because there is that. But I mean, it's an interesting theory. But I'm pretty sure Lucas his answer would probably be more along the lines of what I'm saying, that he was just in there as comic relief, and there was no intention of any kind of. See, the thing is with Star Wars in general, is you can't read too deep below. There's nothing really going on below the surface. What you see for the most part is what you're getting. There are no really weird conspiracies, tricky. Their stories are straight up good and evil, and that's it. That's how he writes these stories. They're not meant to be dissected, and you know what I'm saying? They're just straight up entertainment. So I mean, it's fun to do this stuff, but I don't think he ever intended any of it.
Maybe and maybe not. We can't really prove one way or another. There's a bunch of videos pro and like for it and against.
That's just fan opinion, and the only person who can either say yes or no, this is true, is George Lucas.
Okay, well, as I was going to continue on saying, George Lucas has clips of him being on set and saying statements like Jar Jar is the key. And you can say that that was taken out of context and he was talking about something else, or you can say that he was talking about this Sith theory. It's all just conjecture. And if George Lucas feels like walking himself back after seeing that Jar Jar was a failure amongst fans and saying, no, that was never my idea. We don't really know. Nobody can say if and or but about it, but it is kind of fun just to interpret it that way. As you said, it's all for entertainment. And to kind of counter your point, he is known for very big twists, like Darth Vader being Luke's father. So it would be kind of fun to sit there at the end of this prequel trilogy and say all along, oh yeah, Jar Jar was force sensitive and Palpatine was able to manipulate him into doing the decision that everybody hates. It would be kind of interesting to go down that rabbit hole.
It's like I said, it's there's always going to be people speculating. I've just kind of that it's fun to talk about, but in the end, I think it's just pretty much what. Now, I'm not talking the newer movies, which I can spend another show on. The current crop, but
yeah,
they really irritate us old folks.
That's why this conversation is kind of interesting, is to have the two different perspectives there.
Yeah, I mean, well, JJ, of course, Abrams did those, and of course, he did the Star Trek reboots. So we always joke that he ruined two franchises. So anyway, when we move into Clone Wars again, I think the movie improves. Each movie gets better. At least in the storyline. Of course, there's the love story. Of course, they had to get that love story between Padme and Anakin going. And the problem with a 2-hour movie, even 2.5-hour movie, it's too rushed. There's too much. It happens too fast, I think, and that's what a lot of people had a problem, particularly with poor Christian. He ended up getting a lot of abuse because I think he played the part the way he was told to play it. And I'm not sure that was really the best. I'm trying to get to the page where I can look at my notes here. Well, Hayden I think his direction was, or the way they told him to do that part. He got a lot of hate. He did come across as a very whiny, kind of pathetic person. I don't know. It just didn't make you feel like the guy that was going to become Darth Vader to me in that movie.
No, and it's not supposed to, in my opinion. The second movie is any kind of being washed of his idealistic view of everything. When he was on Tatooine, he viewed becoming a Jedi as his salvation. That's how he was going to thrive in his life. And he got there, he did the training, he got the approval, but then the approval was kind of taken from him. So he's kind of stuck there disillusioned, like this was supposed to be like the end. This was supposed to be my victory, and all of you are standing in my way, and I can feel the fact that I'm more powerful than all of you.
Well,
So
there's no question that,
or I'm going to find it myself and you're not going to like it. It's basically what that movie is.
There's no question that there was a lot of factors that pushed him into the direction. The Jedi were extremely arrogant and short-sighted for a group that's supposed to be able to see, the future and see into things. They were extremely, so that was, of course, but he was also being manipulated by the Emperor, saying, the Emperor purposely said, you're going to be my liaison, whatever, which should be a Jedi Master role. And of course, here he is still a kid. He hasn't completed all his Jedi Master training and tests and trials. And that he's now saying, yeah, well, because we want to keep the Emperor or the president happy, I guess at the time he was still the president, we're going to let you do this thing, but we're not giving you the title of Master.
Exactly.
Which of course drove him more pissed off, but they were kind of like within their rights to do that because, they're trying to play politics as well. Maybe they should have told the president, no, we can't. He's not a master and it has to be this guy but again, this all drives him more and more and more. Like I said, and I was telling you earlier, I think if you watch Clone Wars, the cartoon, the animated series, I should say, that ran from like 2012 or 2008, whenever it started,
2008, yeah.
It fleshes out his character so much better, and you start to see the little things that really started to lead him in. Because I think a lot of us, when we got to the last of the trilogy movies, it seemed like he turned very quickly, quicker than what we felt watching those three movies than it should have been. Considering he considered, Obi-Wan his brother and should have been listening to him. And, why did he just, and he, of course, he thought Padme was dead, which didn't help. And, again, the Emperor was manipulating him quite a bit.
You say that he thinks of Obi-Wan as a brother, but here's kind of my counterpoint to that. I don't think Anakin was the one that chose that dynamic for the two of them. I think Anakin was very desperate for a father figure, and because Obi-Wan, you asked me before, can I lay this all at Obi-Wan's feet? And I feel bad for doing it, but yes, I can. Because if Obi-Wan was more up to the challenge, if he made the right choices like he said that he should have, he could have been that father figure for him, or at least brought him to somebody suitable that could be. But because he took the role as brother and friend as opposed to more of a mentor fatherly role, that left room for Palpatine to come in and go, oh, you sweet special boy, you're the best boy in the universe, you deserve to be a master.
I would argue. I agree. There's a lot to be left at Obi-Wan's feet, as well as the Jedi Council.
I don't like to do it, but it's
it's true. And I think Obi-Wan, even realizes that at the end that, he tried, but he clearly didn't. And again, if you watch the Clone Wars, you see there's this dynamic. There's still this struggle between the two of them, that they do work together. Of course, now Anakin has his own apprentice, which is Ahsoka. Mm-hmm. So, and we see a development with her. And the great thing about that series, the way Fellini wrote it, was you were supposed to dislike Ahsoka from the beginning. Like, you were supposed to dislike her. He meant to make her an irritating, bratty teenager character. But over the course of the series, she has a very interesting arc. And by the end of the series, you love Ahsoka. Okay. So that's why I said I get so important, I think, as I always bring it up, and I know a lot of people do, that the animated series was very necessary to flesh out the story. And it really does a very good job. And I think it vindicates Hayden's performance. And I actually like the guy that did Anakin, who voiced, I should say. I think he did a better job. But no, I don't want to talk ill of it because poor Hayden got a lot of hate when those were released.
For Hayden's performance, it's also it's a very intricate character. Like, if this was a book, it would be so easy to characterize Anakin. but it's so much harder than I think anybody gave him credit for or really thought of, to play this raging hormonal teenager that grew up in a home full of love and emotion, even though it wasn't a perfect home. It wasn't the happiest home or the most, 5-star hotel kind of home, but he had a lot of emotion there. There was a lot of passion there. And all of a sudden he's brought somewhere cold and distant that's so different from his home life. And he's told that he can't have any emotions. He can't have any attachments. He has to be like super to the line. And a kid like Anakin is not used to that. So Hayden Christensen has to play this 19-year-old who's trying to figure all of that out, figure out the stuff that's going on with Padme, and actually play out the main story of what's happening in Star Wars. That's quite a heavy thing to lay at a kid's feet.
That's a good point, but that's always why in every iteration of this, they've always said, even with Luke especially, but they've also said it with Anakin, he's too young to start. He's too young to start the training. And the reason is just what you said, is you need to get them into an environment that they don't have this attachments to people. Because they realize that those are the way that the dark side gets to you. It gets to you through love, in the sense that you don't want anything to happen to your loved ones, so you will do desperate things to save them. And that's exactly what the Emperor, he knew. He was clearly aware of his attraction to Padme, which cracked me up that nobody else really seemed to know it except him, and that he was basically fanning those flames. And making it, and of course implying that she would die and that he could somehow save her with the dark side. So it was all obviously laid out very simply. What I think was interesting was when we see Anakin go, when he finds out that his mother was killed by the Sand People, and he goes out on that and he kills everybody. He said, I didn't just kill the men, I killed everybody.
And what I say here too, he literally says to Padme, he separates it. I didn't just kill the men, women, and children. He says this to her, and like, are we going to say that Natalie Portman is a horrible actress, or are we going to say that she was influenced, because she had no reaction? She just pulled him in and was like, oh, Annie baby, like, it's okay. Like, no, think about it for a second. Your partner comes home, you have no idea where they've been, and they tell you they murdered an entire town of people, men, women, and children. What is your response going to be?
Yeah, she should have been more horrified. You're absolutely right. You're right. And then maybe that was just, but again, I don't know what the directing was there, that she was supposed to be so in love with him. Maybe he was influencing her in some way.
Well, I think we do podcasts like this is because we can kind of discuss what they've left out, because that does add credit to him, even just subconsciously using the Force to influence her to continue to be attracted to what he was and what he was doing, until it got too extreme. Like here, I'm sure she tried to over explain it to herself and kind of victim explain, so to speak, and say, oh, well, these people are responsible for killing his mom. These people go out and they kill hundreds of innocent people. So what he did could arguably be a good thing. It wasn't until it got too extreme that she finally woke up and said, please don't continue on this path. I can't follow you there.
That's a good point.
So interesting. And like right before that discussion too, there's a very interesting point when they get off. I believe it's when they get off the ships. Oh, I'm losing my thought. There's a moment where Annie walks, and where he's going is not where Padme is supposed to go, but Padme follows him anyway. And she kind of has this trance look on her face, and she snaps out of it, and she takes a few steps away from him where she's meant to go. When I noticed that in the final film, I thought that was absolute credit to there's the Force influence. I don't know if anybody ever caught that, but
I don't know either. Again, it's never been brought up by Lucas in any way that I'm aware of. And if somebody knows that he said that she was somehow being manipulated by him, or maybe she was being manipulated by the Emperor the whole time to follow him to drive that forward. It could have been that Anakin was innocent and it was other forces at work causing that to happen. So we don't know. Of course. The other when we get to when we get to the last movie, that was an interesting thing, because you could see he was conflicted right till the end when Mace Windu was fighting Palpatine, you could kind of see it wasn't until the last bit that Anakin finally made that decision to flip. I mean, it was, I think, and then of course he really, although we don't know if Mace Windu died, he just got thrown off the thing. So, but
hard moment to watch for sure.
Yeah, no, it's an intense. It is probably the best of those three films. We get, because not only we get that scene, but then of course we get the really disturbing scene when he goes. You get the Order 66, and he goes to the Jedi Temple, and you don't see him kill the kids, but you know he kills the kids.
Like little Annie looking kid come up to him looking all lost, like, what do we do? It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time I watched that movie, I sobbed through probably more than half of it. Just my heart broke for him.
I think he did, that was done obviously intentionally to show you that he's gone.
So far from what he was,
He's no coming back from this. Of course, like he does eventually 20 years later, but that he's just so distraught and so gone that he would kill children. And you find that really hard to believe, even up to that point, that he would do that. But he clearly does it. And of course, he has the eye change, which I think is very telling, that his eyes go kind of that gold rather than color. And but then we get the battle between Obi-Wan and him, and which is another good sword battle for sure on the floats of the, I don't know how, I guess they're in source bubble, because being that close to lava would burn you even if it wasn't touching you. But just from the radiated heat.
I do have to a fun little factoid about the gold eyes there. That scene was enough of an inspiration for people to consider Hayden Christensen for the role of Edward Cullen in Twilight when talks first came out about that franchise. By the time we actually got the first film, all the actors that were originally wanted for any of the roles were at that point too old to be those roles. But at its conception, Hayden Christensen was heavily discussed as playing Edward Cullen. And I find that so hilarious for the sole fact that Hayden Christensen gets the exact same hate and criticism in this franchise as Robert Pattinson does in Twilight. And as we see Hayden Christensen go on to do other roles like Jumper, and we see Robert Pattinson go on to do other roles like the Batman, and we see that it's not actually their acting ability, it's got to be something else.
Well, that's happened for many actors in different roles. Certain roles shut the door to them to other roles, for whatever reason, whether good or bad. I think we see that a lot. I don't necessarily think it's something specific to this situation, because I've seen there's a lot of actors that they did a great job in one role and then they never get anything else because they're always thought of as this one character, or they're always remembered as that one character.
Yeah, but you're simplifying what I was saying. Their criticisms were exactly the same in the franchises they were chosen for, and one of those criticisms was their acting ability, but they were both given chances to redeem themselves, and now there are a lot of people who really stand up for them and the things that they did in these projects, even though they're wildly hated by a lot of their fandoms. I think the nuances and the parallelness there, and the fact that Hayden Christensen was also considered for the exact same role, is just a fun little fact.
Yeah. And a lot of people have come back and now that it's years later, almost 20 years later. When did the last film was? 2000. It's probably over 20 years now. I think people now have kind of eased up on Hayden quite a bit and realized that it's, it wasn't necessarily him per se.
And Jar Jar,
I didn't like the way he played the character back then either. I still don't. It's cringy in the wine level. It just didn't seem to fit. But again, I think when you watch the animated series, it makes more sense, and the character is a lot less whiny there too. So, and I think that's something else Fellini kind of fixed.
When we decided to do this, you told me it was not necessary to watch the Clone Wars, and that's 4 times you've now said.
Well, I didn't say it's not necessary, but to this germane to this conversation, but I think if you really want to get a sense of the whole story for that prequel, I think it is almost required watching. I mean, there are, you go on YouTube and they'll tell you, or websites that'll tell you, just watch, if you really don't want to watch all the seasons, just watch these key episodes that will get you, from each season. The first couple seasons really don't add much to it. It's not until later that. So Bruce, shut up. Colin.
Oh, I always will. That's the beauty of our friendship.
Yes. So anyway, no, that's okay.
Do it to me too. I love it.
Well, I lost my train of thought now. Oh, I was the fight on Mustafar. That somebody had mentioned that. Yeah, there's no science when I was saying about the burning. You're right. We'll say the Force kept the heat away. That's about as good as anything.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we have that great battle with them, which ends, of course, badly for Anakin. You always wonder, Obi-Wan probably should have. Well, he kind of left him to burn, which I thought was kind of. If you're really gonna say, okay, I have to kill you, he should have just killed him. Just put the saber through his heart and been done with it, and not leave him there to burn, which just, of course, enraged him even more, as we saw. That was about the. That was probably the best acting he did in that whole series. When he was, you saw that. I really got the fact that he really hated Obi-Wan at that moment. I really did. I think that was probably really well done. So,
and not to continue trashing on such a beloved character, because I do love Obi-Wan. He tries, and he's got a great sense of humor. And of course, Ewan McGregor is a national heckin' treasure that we should respect and appreciate. But it kind of, the fact that he doesn't just kill Anakin fully and completely just really shows the weakness of character. And he did try to warn us throughout the film. He's not ready. He's not willing to go and kill Anakin. He's too close to it. He can't. He would rather go face Palpatine and die than go and kill what he feels is his own brother. Which is just ironic that he says it that way, because the fact that he views him as a brother is, in my opinion, the whole reason Palpatine had the door open to manipulate him. But anyhow, it is a very tragic way that happens, that plays out, that he doesn't have the strength of character to put him out of his misery and end it definitively. And again, even from when Annie was a little kid to now, it's still kind of on Obi-Wan's shoulder. So,
I think we see that Obi-Wan does. I think he does own quite a bit of it. Because he does say, even in the original movies, that I tried to train him, and I should have brought him to Yoda, instead of he does kind of say that I was too arrogant. I should. So he does. I think Obi-Wan does take a lot of the blame for what happened.
Oh, I'm not trying to say that he doesn't, but whether or not you take accountability, he's taking accountability for his weakness in character. Just because he takes accountability for it doesn't absolve him of it.
So here's an interesting factoid that you are unaware of because you haven't watched the animated series, but Obi-Wan had his own love interest at one point. So he kind of does, I think, feel he understands what Anakin's going through. Now, He eventually kind of said, "This, I can't have this. This can't happen." But yeah, I think that just adds a little bit. Again, that's why I keep saying that it does flesh out some of the little cracks that fills in things that we don't normally wouldn't see in these three movies.
That's true, but the thing that I like to point out with that and that argument is that Clone Wars did come a long time after both of these trilogies, like the original and the prequels. So this is still kind of, it does fill in the gaps, but it is just as retconning as other things that people want to say, because there are Star Wars official comics now where Jar Jar has wielded a lightsaber, which, if you count those comics, that does confirm that he was sensitive.
I don't think comics are considered canon. Just as novels are not considered canon. I could be wrong. It's all up to George, who decides what. But generally, it has to be a film or a TV show to be considered canon. So I don't know anything that's in a comic book would be considered it's canon.
But in a lot of
online can dispute that. I don't know for a fact.
But in a lot of conversations, like the Clone Wars are also not considered as canon. So it's really just
which cartoons are canon. Absolutely. 100%. 100% canon. Yep. That's how they've been pulling all the Mandalorian, all the Ahsoka stuff. The hell, they've even pulled in, and this is what I've always been saying with Ahsoka, they pulled in Thrawn in Rebels, which is one of the animated series that came out after Clone Wars.
Yeah.
So Thrawn was only ever in Timothy Zahn's novel, but he was so popular. In fact, that whole series of novels were so popular that they literally started pulling bits of that into canon. So that now Admiral Thrawn is canon, because not only was he in the animated series, he was also now in Ahsoka, the live action one. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could say. The point is, the movies, you got to take them for what they are. I particularly am not a huge fan, and I don't think it's necessarily the storyline. One thing I think that when we get to The Force Awakens, one of the things I did like about those, and I don't want to necessarily, we could spend another 4 hours talking about those, but one thing that JJ did do was get back that look of the original trilogy, in the sense that he started using the wipes again. The lighting of the ships was the same. The visuals is what he was able to recreate. And I think that is what made it, initially people were like, oh, this is pretty good. And then you get to the story and you're like, what the hell?
But that's exactly my point, is that the prequels were before the original trilogy, chronologically speaking, whereas the new series is after the original. So, of course, it would look more similar because it comes after. The prequels, as they're named, are they're before. This is what it looks
like. Talking about the story would, but not the way it's shot or the way it looks would have no bearing on whether it was a prequel or a sequel.
No, the way it's shot is a product of its time. I'll concede to that for sure.
But I'm just saying, but there was a certain look to the way they did it. You know where they did it brilliantly was in Rogue One. They did it as well. Rogue One, they hit the lighting when they were at their one scene when they're putting at the Death Star, when you see them putting the big dish into the Death Star, and the way the sun kind of goes across, and then you see the light hit some of the Star Destroyers. That screamed the original series, the original trilogy, the original movie. That little bit of nostalgia made people go, oh, the way they shot people in the fighters, right, from that first person view of you facing them rather than these other angles they had. Those kinds of things, that look that they had is what kind of brought that film really, not only was it a good story, and it was a good prequel to New Hope, in the sense that it really was exactly the prequels. Literally, it starts off, ends where the next one begins. But I'm talking strictly from a production standpoint of what they can get the look to look like, and I think that actually had a lot of bearing on people's opinions of the films, because it gave you that, you started to get that feeling again of what it looked like. So
that's a fair point. One thing I want to say about the Phantom Menace that I had kind of noticed, I showed a few of my friends who kind of heard it. The next time you watch, if you notice when Anakin goes in and he blows up the space station from inside, right after he successfully blows it up, you can hear the first 4 or 5 notes to what will eventually become the big Avengers theme. I had noticed when I was watching that I started getting that Marvel goosebumps, and I was like, why is that happening? So I think
it's just because of John Williams borrows from himself.
It could very well be, but I found that so interesting that you can hear it all the way back then. Like, this was before Avengers, obviously. So to hear that exact same note progression was like, oh, it was perfect. Yes. I loved it.
Bruce is saying the holidays. I'm sorry.
It's unfortunate because he ends up falling, but whatever.
Yeah. Bruce is saying the holiday special was a TV show. Yes, Bruce, and even Lucas will admit that if he could find every single copy of that, he would destroy it. So, well, I guess Life Day has become canon. So there's, and we got Boba Fett from the holiday special. That was the first time we saw. Now remember, we didn't never. Now your version of Star Wars that you saw, the first movie, A New Hope, had Boba Fett in it. Boba Fett was never in the original cut of the 77 film. So we didn't see Boba Fett till Empire, but we did see him as a cartoon character in that holiday special, and he became massively popular just from that. And then, of course, he got bigger and bigger parts throughout. He was never intended initially to be that key of a player. And then look, now we have whole series based on his backstory. So and again, not to keep bringing up the animated series, but the whole Mandalorian legacy and is all built into that Clone Wars of what Mandalore was, why there's Mandalorian armor, why there's only 2 of them, why.
So I finished Clone Wars and we can have a discussion about that, okay?
I don't know what, Bill. I don't know what you mean. So Lucas is coming to your house? I don't know. Is he? To burn your copy of the holiday special? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Good luck with that. One thing I guess you understand: if you do meet George, don't mention those words Star Wars to him. He doesn't like to talk about it.
I mean, would you, after all this time, like with all the hate that the prequels got, like that's what I don't understand. And I'm not trying to single out the Star Wars fandom, because the Scream fandom very much has the same thing, as I'm sure a lot of fandoms do, is that people are saying, oh, well, the prequel trilogy is not my thing. It's not a real thing. I'm not going to count it, this, that, and the other thing. It's made by the maker of Star Wars. What do you mean you're not going to take it seriously?
Let me tell you, George has gotten his own level of hate from the fans over what he's done. Which I know sounds kind of ironic, but
when people just absolutely
I hate him for re-editing them, the original movies. Not hate, strong word. I'm really disappointed that he did that and then doesn't allow us to have the original cuts available.
That is true.
So that is what hurts. Now I was able, like I said, there's people, because fans are fans, there's people who have rebuilt and cut and put it back together and have HD copies of the original cuts from 77 and 80 and 80, whatever the hell it was. So of all the 3 original movies, with the original, everything is the storyline. They didn't change anything. That was I think, even irritated people even farther, was it wasn't so much that he added the CGI, is that he literally changed the story, and that was very disappointing. But anyway, we are. Oh, you know what? I never did the drink. After all that, we got so into this. Let me put the drink up real quick. It is on the Facebook. Where the hell's my mouse?
Now that we're at the hour and drink, I want to summarize for the prequel. I tell people the drink before my defense.
Yeah, you're just so you know, you're dropping in and out a little bit there. I don't know what's going on there, but well, there's the drink. I'll let you guys read it. I'll let Alex talk. Go ahead.
So my defense is the scoring, the music is fantastic, due in part to the prequels as well as the original series. We have John Williams in the official Hall of Disney Legends, which is a fantastic feat, and congratulations to him for getting that. My other defense is that the prequel trilogy is the most memeable. We've had that prequel trilogy relevant AF for over 15 years, so I think that's quite incredible. There are fun conspiracies to kind of go down the adventure trail with. It was empowering to kids at the time for little Anakin, as much as he does fall later on. Seeing the first episode was very empowering as a 9-year-old myself. And it's a lot of fun. You get to explore new worlds. You get to explore characters deeper because you're not as far into the action as you are in the original series. It gives, for fans who, respectfully to other fans, those of us who do care more about a character story than we do care about the action, the prequel trilogy really gives you the meat of the characters to care about before you get into the action of the original series. And it gives the original series a different kind of perspective. And like I said, a ring of tragedy that wasn't wholly there until you got to see that little kid cry over his mom. And I think that's really intense and special. And overall, I just love that throughout all of the generations, not just yours, not just mine, but also the next one coming, we all have our own vantage point of the Star Wars franchise. It is more than just a company. It is more than just a money-making machine. It's something that means something very special to all of us. I think that is a great defense of both the prequels and the original.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I think we've probably beaten this to its pulpit.
Yeah.
It seems like pretty much everybody was agreeing. I didn't really see a lot of dissent. So yeah, I'm most people. I mean, yeah, you're like I said, you're always gonna have your old timers like me, your crusty old farts. We're never gonna admit or release the fact that the original trilogy was still the best, and always will be. And with the exception of Rogue One, I haven't seen anything that really would make me draw me to the franchise like the original trilogy did, even close. But let me put it this way: I saw the original film like in the theater close to 100 times or something like that. Literally, I'm not even making that number up. I can't remember another movie that I saw more than once in the theater, with the exception of Rogue One.
I've had quite a few, but that's just because that's who I am as a person.
So, I think that's to me, that's telling for me that, yeah, I've seen other movies multiple times, but the only films that really wanted me to go back and see it on a big screen was those two movies.
For me, it was Lord of the.
I've seen Empire and Jedi multiple times in the theater as well. So, but none of the other ones.
Don't care. Well, tell you what, why don't we leave the door open and maybe I'll come back and we'll discuss the other ones from different vantage points.
We can, but I gotta tell you, the Force Awakens trilogy, I really absolutely hate.
So then it's just
not gonna be. I can be somewhat positive about the prequels, but I'm gonna need other people in here because I'm gonna be just shitting all over it because it's just the plot holes, or you could drive a Star Destroyer through.
That's fair. Maybe we should do more of a roundtable discussion. That would be fun.
So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, all right. Well, it's way past 8:00. I usually try to keep this to an hour. I respect everybody's time. So absolutely. I want to thank you for coming on, filling in for Mary Beth. I'm sure she was listening at one point. I don't know if she still is, but absolutely. She will be back next week. I don't know what anybody's doing because she always was the one that took care of that, of what Roy was doing. So go watch Roy on Friday or Sunday or whenever he's on. Look on his page. You'll find the same thing with Phil. Phil's on Captain Phil's Facebook page. You can see what he's on, if he's on the overnight or whatever he's doing. So I don't know what we're doing next week. We had a plan, but I need to talk to her and see what we're doing. So I don't know what we're going to do, but it'll be something. So.
Well, all right. I want to start Clone Wars and we can do a discussion about that.
There you go. All right. On that note, I will say good night. Live long and prosper. And of course, may the Force be with you. Good night, everybody.
And also with you.
There you go.